Well,
So,
I'll be a stand-in for Jessica and
please.
say, Ryan, do you want to get us started?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could sit here all day and listen to y'all's stories. I guess the reason it's useful for me to find out where you all are at is you always want to tailor the conversation to the needs of the people, and you don't want to just entertain your own fanciful speculations. And so I have a tendency to do that when I'm digging into a text. So one of the ways I told Jessica, I'm sort of experimenting with progressively moving myself away from being the center of the conversation and trying to make the text the center of the conversation. So here's what I'd love for us to be able to do tonight. If you've been able to read the text, fantastic. If you haven't been able to read the text or you don't have a copy of the text, I'm going to drop actually, I don't know if I can drop the whole thing into the chat or not. I've got it right here on my desktop. Let's see if that'll work. That way you'll have a copy of it handy. Let's see if that'll fit. She may have it to where I can't do that. Okay, I'll hunt it down. I'll hunt it down by way of Dropbox. And Jessica will be here at some point, I'm sure. And I know she has it by way of Dropbox because she's doing something with her kids. But anyway, what I'd love to do is I'd love to be able to pick out specific passages from the text and zero in on them directly. I have right here, I have my own digital copy, and it corresponds pretty directly to your material copies if you have one. But if you don't have a copy with you, that's cool. You can just look at my screen and we'll focus on the passages that are in front of us. I have a split screen to where I have the text at the top and I have a notepad at the bottom so that we can scribble. I like to scribble the things that you're saying so that we can process them. We can also talk about methodologies in terms of interpreting this kind of stuff like we did a little bit last week, but also Steve mentioned last week that the difficulty with these kinds of phenomenological texts when they don't have concrete examples. And even though Henri in these chapters goes a little closer, he still very much tends towards the abstract. And you can see that he says that very purposefully in the Kandinsky article. And I think it was Maureen who asked this last week, whether one of these essays would cover some of the same ground that are in some of his books. And in large part, they do. Some of the things he says about barbarism in here is kind of the groundwork for his essays there. The things he says about Marx in some of these essays are the groundwork for things he says in other, in what is it? Life and Reality or Marx, I can't remember what it's called. So this is a good resource for those reasons. So that being said, I'm not going to rehash any of Henri unless you want me to. And I do want to address something Karen said just a minute ago, very candidly, and I appreciate that she was able to put this forward. This sort of inferiority issue. Now, I say that carefully because I don't want to present myself as like, oh, well, people, think Ryan is averse, in these texts, and therefore we can't say certain things. That is, as it was so poetically said a moment ago by Jackie, is bullshit in many respects. I think that these texts are difficult, and they're difficult because they're obscure. But they may have insights. It's kind of like looking at a weird painting and not being used to going to, Museum of Modern Art, not being able to kind of work through the color schemes and everything yet. And that's totally normal. I want people to be able to express that. And it takes months, I think, sometimes in any course that I've ever been a part of, for people to believe that I actually feel that way. I would have with college students all the time. I'd say, Tim, what do you mean by that? What you said this, what does that mean? And they would think, oh, shit, he's about to trick me. I'm going to say what I'm going to say. And then he's going to be like, no, that was incorrect. And it takes them many months to figure out that I can't outthink 20 people. So people are seeing things that, that's the only reason we're here. The reason this exists is like anybody can read these books at home, right? Anybody can listen to these audio pieces. Yeah. But being here with each other and getting you think of that Merleau-Pontian idea that like, I can't see the back of my head, I can't see the other side of the statue, but if you're standing over there, you tell me what you see. And so there's a certain collective value to that. So I just want to keep that on the table so that everybody feels free to question, to investigate, to speculate. I'm not like Gareth. I want to speculate, I'm just giving him a hard time because he's not around. So it's fun. But if you want to be critical, Steve is in the room. It's a normal thing. So, feel free. Anyway, that being said, I don't feel the need to go back and round out everything about Henri. I just want, my wife is bringing me food, but I'm not going to eat it right now.
Do you count your blessings? He's a terribly loud chewer.
Yeah.
Well, why bother eating while you're drinking?
So handsome.
Thanks, Angela.
Yeah, they're saying thanks to you, and then they're watching me drink, so that's good enough.
I tell them I have dysphonia. That's where you hate the sound of people eating.
Oh, yeah. No, you don't like the sound of me eating.
Anyone.
Okay, that's fine. Anyway, does anybody want me to go back and recap Henri in a specific time frame? Yes?
I have a little question.
Yep.
I was looking around going like, I was sure I wrote some questions somewhere. Why can't I find the questions? And I was like, oh, here it is. The Ryan book. It's in here.
That's awesome.
Where did I put those things? Josh and I both, we've been reading a lot of Vedic stuff and studying Bhagavad Gita a lot. And I wonder if Henri's idea of absolute life, this life that pervades everything, the chair has life, the stone has life, we have consciousness, we're all kind of one big unity. I think of it as being strongly analogous to Brahman. I mean, I can't tell what the difference is. Let me put it that way. I can't understand what the difference would be.
Well, let me ask you, because
he's choking.
I'm drinking whiskey. Let me ask you then, because I'm not, by no means am I a Vedic scholar.
Oh, me neither. Me neither.
Well, you have more experience right now in your reading.
Oh, okay.
Maybe you can answer this more directly. In the the Brahmin tradition or any kind of expanded Hindu tradition, do these I don't know if I want to call them forces. Do these realities, are they general or specific? Like, is this undergirding presence of all giving life in a religious sense, in a Hindu sense, or something like that? Are they specific? Are they determinate? Or are they more like a plane that undergirds things but never becomes part of things? Like
I would say no, it's more like it is everything, all matter and all psychic energy and all spiritual energy. And we are part in the same, we are physically part of it. We are spiritually part of it. We are intellectually part of it. It's all one thing. And then there's, in my baby understanding of it, we have kind of like a couple of natures. And one of the natures that we have is kind of like our true self that's more in touch with Brahman. And then we have our kind of more like ego self, or the self that becomes attached to the world and becomes attached to other people and becomes attached to stuff and activities or whatever. And that's that's just a part of us. But basically Brahman is living, pulsing, throbbing with life, and it's everything. It's all matter. In the way that, like, if I'm always saying, like, if I was torn apart by a lion, then later on I would be part of the grass and part of the sun, and that's all part of my personal timeline. So I'm just part of everything, and everything is part of me. And I was just kind of trying to figure out what is the difference. Like, to me, it seems like it's the same thing, but I'm sure that there's a difference, but I don't know what it is. Because he says absolute life, and that tables have it and I have it. And I kind of go, well, I can only think of one way to look at that.
Yeah.
So that's one question.
Yeah. First of all, let me just say one quick thing about that. You could probably pursue your own doctorate in that, write a dissertation on that, because that may be a question that's left unanswered. the people that have interacted with Henri have not necessarily cross-applied him to Eastern traditions.
Yeah.
So there's not a whole lot of literature out there about it. He does narrow in, as Steve mentioned last week, he does narrow in pretty directly on Christianity because he takes the term life and he filters it. I mean, he's a Western French dude, that grows up in the shadow of a Catholic church, most likely. And so I don't know that he directly interacts with it, but it would be worth investigating.
Yeah. I just figured, that it would just be a word that maybe that you were familiar with, and you'd say, here's the difference between that and this. But I'm not saying that he was, studying Hinduism or anything. I was just wondering what the difference was between this idea in this tradition and his idea. And then another question I had, did you say that affectivity, this just comes down to like vocabulary, affectivity is roughly the same as kind of the unconscious mind and roughly the same as the collective unconscious?
I would, the reason I brought up the collective unconscious was only because I think it at least gives a decent frame of reference for what Henri means when he says self. He is not describing a discrete person.
Because the word affectivity to me just didn't, it didn't tie into that. But basically, your unconscious then is your affectivity, is your ability to contact that unconscious mind.
Yeah, the key. Go ahead.
No.
So for him, it's like when he says affectivity, he doesn't mean emotions. He means something that is so immediate you don't think in order to get to it.
Okay.
Feeling is more immediate than my thought processes are. So a very famous study: people are sitting in a chair, they're watching a television. Their nodes connected to their brain, their nodes connected to their hands, and they're watching things that stimulate them emotionally. And they're being told, once you feel a certain thing, we want you to tap this button. And by and large, to a man, the sensations that are connected, that are observed in the brain scan are preceding the locomotor ability to respond to it, which indicates to us that most of the time our brain is more like a gate that is allowing certain feelings to be processed and some not being processed. So since affectivity is so like, it's subdermal, it's like below your skin, it's so real. It's more real than the thought thing is. Like we can't think it because thinking is already too late. It's already too slow.
Okay. So if you're reading, you're safe kind of roughly thinking affectivity, subconscious, lizard brain, I guess, the reactive brain or the reactive trauma. Mind.
Yeah. Deep rivers of unarticulatable, never articulatable positions in life. And sometimes that comes out as trauma and manifests itself as such, but sometimes that is just it. So a good example of this is like collective affectivity. Like you go to a football game and everybody just stands up. And then when this plane flies over the sound of the engine, all of a sudden everybody's got like hooting and hollering. And the learned person is like, what is this sociological experiment? Puff cigarette, tap, tap, French, whatever. And is like, is processing this mentally. But the people on the ground, the affective condition of just being there and being present. And it's not just the extensive sensory input of my ears or my hands. What he's saying is, yeah, we have that. The engine flew over and my ears heard it. That was an external sensation. I felt the person beside me stand up. That was an external sensation. But he keeps probing further and saying affectivity sometimes doesn't even rely on our bodies. And the example of that would have been like a phobia. That once I've eradicated the object of my phobia, the phobia still is lurking in this strange place that is so pre-thought that wherever that is, that thing, that reality is where reality starts. And the thinking reality is a response to that. So that's what he means by affectivity. Go ahead.
Is his phenomenological method
Mm-hmm.
wanting to, in Husserl's term, describe that affectivity first, or is his phenomenology still a normal phenomenology, just with that affective caveat?
Good question. I think it's a great way to frame it. I think if I were going to be fair to Henri, I think what he is trying to expose that Husserl's phenomenology obscures what it tries to find. So rather than saying he's going to establish a different phenomenology and a different methodology, he's saying phenomenology is fine, but the way we've been doing it has been looking at the wrong thing. Every time we look at an object, try to figure out what perception of an object is, we've never asked, how did we get there to begin with? What was the affective, like super primordial affective reality that made appearing even possible? And he thinks that primordial sort of condition is so radically apparent that you're going to find it in Heidegger, even if Heidegger doesn't know it's there. You're going to find it in Husserl, even if Husserl doesn't know it's there. And like every philosopher who thinks they've got it all figured out, he's the one to come and, with the flashlight and point at it. But again, in his mind, it's something that has been there since Descartes. It was in Hume. It was in Maine de Biran. It was in Félix Ravesson. It was in Kierkegaard. He just thinks there's this lesser tradition over here that sort of got swept under the rug during the rise of empiricism and rationalism. It's like all that stuff of like feeling was reinterpreted as a psychological condition and was never treated with genuine philosophical rigor, except for a few voices. Does that answer that question?
Yes.
Or at least address it? Okay. Okay. Any other opening preliminary questions or things we need to cover from an introductory standpoint?
I have a question, but not from an introductory standpoint.
Okay. Do we need to go to a particular text for it?
I will probably be pointing us to a text. It'll be that last essay we read.
Okay.
But the initial question is, does Henri accept or entertain the Sapphire-Wharf hypothesis? And for the rest of us, the Sapphire-Wharf hypothesis is the idea that I see the Sapphire-Wharf hypothesis as a spectrum. So the idea is that language helps to dictate the way we interact with the world. You can do that in terms of just basic, what color is this? How would you describe it? Do you even have the word for the color orange? All the way to something more extreme, that reality actually bends around language, or vice versa. Does Henri entertain that at all?
Not in those terms, not in the terms of that particular hypothesis, but I do think he is, in that last essay and elsewhere, trying to critique that hypothesis. And we can jump straight to language if you all want to jump to the second essay first and then talk about Kandinsky second. That's fine with me. Do we want to rate? So are y'all seeing my screen with the Michel Henri reader?
Yeah.
Yes.
So basically we have two things to look at tonight. We're looking at the question of, I don't like that weight. Let me get fatter. We're looking at, that's too fat. We're looking at the question of art. Can you all see that okay? Is that coming through okay?
Yep.
Okay. We're asking the question of art, and we're asking the question of word. And I'm just putting word up here just so it's short and looks kind of symmetrical. And the questions that he's exploring is that if life is the ground of all of reality as we know it, then what happens when we do it on purpose in this thing called art? And what is the relationship of language to accessing this thing we call life? And He is pumping into this and pumping this direction. He's pumping into this same critique that if we don't take the this is the important term here. If we do not take phenomenality, if we do not take that seriously, phenomenality, if we do not take that seriously, then we are going to have weird understandings of language, and we are going to have weird understandings of art. And one of the things that makes Henri difficult is that he is hiding his logic in all of these really complex verbal interactions. And the logic is strikingly simple. The logic is basically, and he does this a couple times. He does this in the last essay where he points out like 1, 2, 3. He basically says it's very simple. If language is something that I use, let's make language as the L, in order for things to appear to me. And we can make the thing that appears to us a book, since we're in book oblivion and the book has not fallen into oblivion, blah, 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 right? Party line, I'm saying the mission statement, whatever. And if the book has not fallen into oblivion and we are looking at the book and the language is coming to us, we've had this concept that we've inherited from philosophy that the only access I have to the quote outside world is through this thing, through words. And we love that idea because all of a sudden we realize, oh my God, it's reflexive too. Like my only understanding of myself is my ability to use words, right? We just had this experience, right? Maureen says, is it a matter of this word versus this word? What's the difference between this idea and that idea? In large part, that's indicating like words are our access point. Like they give us a way in. Even if we're going to talk about groaning and moaning, right? You think of the Om sound in the Buddhist tradition, the yawning of creativity in the first abyss opening, blah, blah, blah. And what Henri is saying is that if we believe that about language and that language is always somehow mediating the outside, then that language will become indifferent to its object. And that language will actually be an act of disappearing because it doesn't really have any kind of ontological value. Mm-hmm. It cannot create anything, and therefore will ultimately lead to philosophies that celebrate death. And go ahead. Does anybody want to jump in there? Okay.
I'm just going to say, yeah, that's everything that I've been thinking, studying, teaching for my whole life. Death.
Perfect. Yeah, death, exactly. Death in literature, death in literature, death in literature, death in literature. And he's saying that if that happens, this is why you get Heidegger, who ends up saying that a being is being towards death. This is why you end up getting Hegel, who talks about the importance of death in order for things to move forward along this cycle. This is why you end up getting a Derrida, who will talk about about nothingness and death. This is why you'll get a Blanchot, who writes that the whole movement of life is just like, you can't, for Blanchot, it's like, you can't actually die, because then you would have it. So you can only be dying, and you're like constantly dying. And he doesn't mean this in a biological sense. He means it like it's bizarre, but you get bataille. By the way, we should do bataille in here sometime, because if you can ever get philosophers who talk about excrement and like human sacrifice, then you want bataille. Talk about a weirdo, but man, so interesting. But what you get with these people, what he's saying is that all of this hovers around this very central notion that language is access to an outside. And therefore, he thinks that is problematic. And he is trying in that last essay to say that basically you don't want a language like that, because that language only goes one direction, which is absolute just Are you all familiar with Derrida's notion of the gift? Does that sound familiar? So in Derrida's, this is a great way to explain it. It's great. So Derrida basically says this. In Derrida's notion of the gift, this was a great debate in philosophy, and like I guess it really kind of started in the probably the late 70s and early 80s. But the question was basically, you've heard this before in some lay version, like, should I ever give someone a gift if I know they're going to thank me for it? You know, like if I give it to them and then they thank me for it and they're like, yay-hoo, you know, they're clapping and cheering. Did I ever give the gift originally for charitable purposes, or did I give it in order to receive the, praise? And so the question was that if you wanted to eliminate that, then the problem was it actually would have to make me completely disinterested in whatever was given. I couldn't know the quality of it. I had to take away all its properties. I couldn't know whether it was good for you. I couldn't know whether the garment fit. I couldn't know whether you were allergic to it. Because if I knew any of those things in advance, then I wasn't purely giving it. I was giving it because I knew it wasn't allergic, and therefore you'd be happy. And if you were happy, that would make me pleased. If I knew that it fit, then you would like it, and that would make me feel satisfied and give it. I had to completely disconnect myself, which meant for Derrida, it became really damn hard to understand the difference between a curse and a gift. They were in a binary relationship. Whatever I gave you, it could kill you or it could save your life. Didn't mean shit to me because I couldn't be involved in the giving. I had to be cut off from the beginning. And so he says the same thing about hospitality. I can't welcome a guest if I know I'm going to feel good about welcoming the guest. So I don't ever know whether I'm welcoming a guest or a killer. And so you're constantly in this place of never knowing where you stand with the binary. And therefore, life and death, interchangeable. I could live, I could die. You don't know. And so Henri is attacking the notion that lies at the core of Derrida's concepts, which he inherited from other people. And that is this. As long as I have language somewhere right here that's a veil between me and the outside world, then I put myself in a position of never being able to fully engage that outside world because I'm afraid of my self-involvement. I want to be pure. But the only way to be a pure object is to completely deny my subjectivity. And then I become a disinterested party. It's like Kant's categorical imperative. Kant said, if a duty has a reward, it's not categorical. So if the only universal moral has to be something that's so generally defined that nobody can count it as unique to them. And so Kant's only moral advocacy was you got to do to other people what they would want to do to you. Basically, golden rule kind of stuff, because it's not defined. We can all share in it. It doesn't belong uniquely to me. So it was bland. It was an ethic of pure distance. And Henri is attacking all these notions and saying that doesn't give us shit to live with. We can't live with that. I either need to roll out the garbage for my neighbor because I love that person and I feel good about loving them, or I need to not know the difference of whether I'm putting a bomb in their mailbox or rolling out the garage. And so he's saying our counts of language are built upon those same basic philosophical concepts. And he thinks those concepts are derived from always making the world objective. If the whole world is built on the outsidedness of things, then the highest value of all of reality would be pure objectivity, pure disinterest, pure doubt. And his argument is, yeah, you're right. He's saying, if the ground of all reality was observation and external perception, but if we do that, he's saying, in Husserl, Heidegger, anybody, you will find this ground under the ground that nobody's talking about. And that is, how does appearance start to begin with? And he says appearance begins with some kind of affectation. And that's a clue to what's deeply down in the belly of reality. Does that make sense generally speaking? Does anybody want to chime in on that? Go ahead.
So basically, to Noah's original question, he doesn't disagree with any of the text-based theories that are out there, the post-structuralists and everything else. He simply says their conclusion is unacceptable. And therefore he wants a different way to see how we understand language and what it does. And that this is the move that he's about to make that lost me. How he got from this objection to where he ends up with logos. It's like the only thing I could come up with is that he was just pissed off. He just didn't. He didn't like the death theories and said, "Well, there's got to be something else then, because I'm not happy with it." And I said, I'm trying to put it in the context of the larger thing that he's talked about. I can see how he gets there that way.
At least for me, it almost sounds like he's trying to move in terms of your diagram, Ryan. He's trying to move the L of language from being between us and the outside to it being something unconscious to the left of the person.
Yes.
That also permeates the whole notion of life, affectivity, the imminence of his notion of life.
Yes. For him, see how I've drawn the L and all the blue lines? That's the way he thinks of it. Language, life speaks itself to itself. And because it does that, and this is to go back to Maureen's original question, this is why I was asking about Brahman more particularly. And again, because I'm not a scholar in that area, I can't speak effectively to the differences without knowing enough about the tradition. But what I would say is and he says this, and in fact, I should just go to it. Let's go there. Give me 2 seconds to find it. When he discusses suffering, he thinks that this activity, well, actually, let me say this about Steve's point really quickly. Yes, he does not disagree with that inherited tradition that ends up in the death concept. What he thinks is he's not just offering an alternative, but saying that that's only one side of the story. And if you only assume the outside is the completion of all appearance, then you are only going to end up with death. If, however, and now he does prioritize life. Now, life and death are not equal, so it's not a yin yang in that sense. It's not balanced. So I don't want to mislead anybody there, but he's saying that these death concepts are the consequence of a philosophical decision that was made hundreds of years ago, that was repeated unwittingly. And that the only way out of that is to kind of dig back through the phenomenological tradition and find in all those little pieces like remnants of a concept that has gone untouched. And for him, that is, what is the original moment of appearing? Mm-hmm. And I'm gonna say this to Maureen's question, but I'm gonna try to find it in the text so that we can address it more directly. The danger. Can I erase this diagram, by the way? Otherwise, I'll have to turn a whole page. Okay, let me just do this. Come on, I'm gonna get a big old fat eraser. Yay! Oh, Karen, did that just break you? I'm sorry. Let me go back.
Yes, it did. It did.
Watch this. Watch this.
How
Watch
did
this.
you guess?
Watch this. Watch this.
Because I want you to send them all to me.
Look, I'm doing it right now. You can see it on the screen.
Star. Sorry, I'll be quiet. Thank you. It kills. I'm so sorry.
Karen, tell it to me real quick, Karen.
Yes.
What do you got? What's the next part? I don't have it on the iPad. Karen, what?
Oh, sorry, Karen D. Adler 1. Actually, what the email? My email address.
Adler
Oh no, don't
Karen,
disturb the class. It's not fun. I feel guilty now. No, don't do it. Don't disrupt
you
the
should
class.
you should feel terrible. I hope it like ruins your
Oh,
no.
great.
Please tell me tell me the rest of
sorry.
it. Is it Gmail?
Yes, at gmail.com. It's Karen Dadler1. Karen D Adler1 at gmail.com.
Okay. Hold on now. We're gonna get this.
Oh, I'm so sorry, everybody. This is
Would you
If he
stop?
doesn't do it now, he's not going to get it done. You know how this works.
He's exactly right. He's exactly right. Come on, guy. Come on.
Is that the Zoom whiteboard you're using?
No, I'm actually using a program called, let's see, it's called Notes Writer. The reason I used it this time is that I can split texts, so I can have the Henri reader up here and scroll through it. And then I can have a notepad below it. It's a decent thing. I'm very fond of applications that don't have a lot of like clunk up here with tools. It's got a little too many tools for me. But I think it's useful for people on the other side of the screen to be able to have the text in front of them at the same time. So Karen, it should be coming your way. All right. I'm going to delete this now. So if you want it, you ask Karen about it. What was I saying a second ago? I've already forgotten about it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
I used to teach creative writing to Korean students. They were at a music conservatory, and they would tell me that thinking in English just gave them so much anxiety versus the Korean language, which I guess you could say didn't have that affectivity, maybe is the word. No. And I just thought that was just so interesting how, just like and they would make themselves think in English because they want to get the English right. They wanted to think in English. So anyway, I just kept thinking of that when we were talking about just the way that language gets in the way of things. You know what I mean? So, and anxiety, and anxiety being death,
Yeah. Exactly.
So, like that, the whole math of language, subject, verb, object, verb, subject, whatever, I mean, in Korean, I don't really know, but I don't know that language and the math that's to that, but it's obviously different. So it's just
very much so. Did your Korean students feel that it was more that English was more mechanical than the sort of
they thought it was more actually more emotional. There's just so much to it, and it just gave them too much anxiety.
That's fascinating.
Which is fascinating was they were, like Juilliard-ish students, Fascinating was the musical aspect of them and how and they were able to just compose beautiful music and play it and sing it. And yet the English language, thinking it gave them so much anxiety. So.
Yeah. It makes me want to press over to the art essay, but I want to finish this bit about language. So don't let me forget about that with respect to the music, because some of the things he says about art and figural drawing and things like that, I think are related. So when Maureen asks, what are the distinctions? The thing that I'm thinking the most is that one of the things that Henri points out is that if you have this notion of life, it's really hard to draw, but let's just imagine it's this sort of squiggly underbelly to every instantiation or manifestation. His first book is The Essence of Manifestations, his major work, way before he becomes religious, by the way. So he has like a span of like a 30, 40 year career. And he starts out very much focused on the nature of appearance. By the end of his life, becomes much more religious in nature. So if you want to, it's kind of like early and late Heidegger. There's an early and late Henri. But let's imagine, just for the sake of argument, that there is this sort of undercurrent, which is reality. The danger here, and he recognizes this in the last essay, is that this could be a very general, non-descriptive, vague thing. And he alludes to this, like he's basically saying, I would not have fixed the problem if I only gave you a life that just was sort of like a principle, kind of like Henri Bergson's Elan Vital or Deleuze's idea of virtuality. It's always a might. I don't know if you're familiar with either one of those thinkers, but basically the idea is it's like there's a certain possibility. Like if
Sorry, Ryan. Could you just repeat what you just said about the long tom and the lock thing you just mentioned?
Yeah. So the Elan Vital is the notion. This is the notion of Bergson's, which is like the vital force that's in things. And then Gilles Deleuze has this notion of virtuality, which is like, he calls it memory. He calls it a lot of things. It's this notion that this sort of stuff is kind of, here's the world and here's pure possibility sitting back here. So the things we know in the world are like my screwed up knee. The things we know in the world are, my cigar. Things we know in the world are going to be my kitchen sink, right? Sorry, that's too far. Let me go back. I made that arc too. That's going to bother me. My kitchen sink. All those things are very materially specific things. And many philosophers have posited the notion that there is this other realm that is giving life to stuff. Plato had it, a world of forms. Aristotle had it in Teleki. Everybody's had it. Certain figures have had it. It's God. For Deleuze, it's the virtual. It's another plane of reality. And for Heidegger, it's pure being. And it crosses into reality from not being to being through words. That's what Heidegger thinks. And Henri says, well, shit. Have I just posited this notion of life? There's a dispute about crackers. He said, have I just posited this notion that life is like out here? Is it just another version of a basic transcendental principle that never comes into reality but always grounds it? And this is where things are a little bit different with Henri, is that he says, no, what he's trying to do, at least, and you can disregard that, or not disregard, but you can critique him. This is what people have critiqued him for, is that life is determinate. It's determinate in the sense that when life speaks itself to itself, it's always extremely concrete. So it's more like, are you familiar with the term corpuscular? Like think of a barnacle on a boat. Like, it starts out as a little bitty thing and it kind of continues to like billow out into like a weird formation. So for him, life is corpuscular. Life speaks itself to itself and it's always like building out. And these forms that it builds are extremely determinate. And life is present there amongst those things. Over here in this model, life is held in reserve. It's something we never actually access, but we benefit from. It comes to us. And he's saying that's just hogwash. If that's the truth, then we can't tell if life is sending a curse or a blessing. We can't tell if life is interested in us or not interested in us. And no matter what language can do, I don't care if language unveils that shit or not, we can't know. Sorry, I've had enough drinks to be just cursing freely. I apologize. We can't know. Look at Kara. She kicks, but she's going to shotgun a beer. Are you going to? No, it's a Coke. Okay. Sorry, this is being recorded. So Jessica, we apologize. It doesn't matter if language can give that stuff to me or not. If it is on the other side of reality, if it's on the outside, I can never actuate anything. So it leaves me in a place of perpetual death. So life can't be in reserve. Life has to be whatever is speaking to itself, these little blue circles, is my life. So I live, in his mind, I live because of life. And this is the difference between something that's sort of sitting outside of reality, giving reality its being. This life that he's talking about is no less or more present in the conversation I'm having with you than it is in the whiskey that's sitting here or the thing that happened to me yesterday. And every time life begets, every time life incarnates, it is radically concrete. It is this moment, this person, at this time, in this way. Because in his mind, that's what life does. Now, why do I bring that up right now? It's because language in so many of these philosophies is this line. And in his imagination, to cross that line is to already acknowledge that the line exists. So if we believe that language does that, reveals things that are not yet, are not available to us, then all we're doing is pushing reality further and further away from ourselves. So what we require is a language that somehow circles us back to what we already are, that's powerful enough to make itself, a language that is concrete enough that whatever it begets, whatever it gives, whatever life gives is also, so I guess we should say it this way. Life lives. It doesn't just give. Life doesn't give a reality. Life lives. It is an actual thing. So what I am in his mind is life living itself. In terms of language, then, that means what I am or what these curtains are or what these blinds are is life speaking itself. And therefore, we are never in want or in need of something that is held in reserve back here that we're waiting to appear. We're also should be never afraid that death is on the other side of this line. Because that's what the other philosophers went to, is that as long as that line is there, that thing that's unknowable out here, we're just going to call it death because we're scared shitless of it and we're trying really hard not to experience it. But his point all the way through his text is that line is held together by a philosophical assumption that the whole goal of reality is to come from the outside. But if it all starts in and amongst us at all times, and no matter what we're doing, it's kind of like Maureen said, if I turn into just a piece of carbon that is then eaten by a bird at some level, that's still life. But life is not a thing below the bird or beyond the bird that's organizing matter. Life is that matter itself. For Henri. And therefore, if that's true, we can disagree whether it is, we can reject that, we can critique that. Then these two essays are saying that language is like this circle in and on itself, talking to itself. And art is our ability to bring that into visibility. Because this green line is always happening invisibly. That doesn't mean it's out here on the outside. It just means we don't see it. It's always happening. And art is our ability to retrace our steps of the invisible and find it and feel it. We are not ever trying to know it. He says this several times. He quotes Descartes, sentimus non videre. We feel, we don't see. And so to live is to feel. And that does not mean with my skin. It doesn't mean with my ears. It doesn't mean with my chin. It doesn't mean with my nose. It doesn't mean smell. It means that I participate in the core modalities of life, which are suffering and joy. And when I participate in them, my life is itself a unique corpuscular bulb on this thing called life. My life is this. So there is such a thing as my life. Whereas in these other traditions like this, where life is this thing out here that's like pulsating through stuff, that belief is every little specific thing is irrelevant because they're all going to fold back into the grand life. It's very Hegelian. They're all going to like just be swallowed up in the grand movement of reality. Not for Henri. Your life as it is, sitting on the other side of the screen matters. Now, Henri hates technology, as you can tell, so he never really engaged with the question of how material glass and plasma and copper wire is. But nevertheless, that's the concept there. Now, I know I've detoured quite a bit on that, but I wanted to point that out. And I said we were going to get the text more now at an hour in, and we haven't looked at the text yet. So I'd love to turn to that. But if anybody wants to comment on that, feel free, because that's a very aggressive notion.
You said something with your analogy.
Anybody else?
Okay, great.
I'm just kidding. Go ahead. I love you. I love you.
No, I know. With your analogy of the blinds and the curtain, you said something along the lines of language is almost before them. The language of life is almost before them and is almost projecting itself out onto us. I don't know.
Yes. Okay.
Does that mean that language is primordial to the object or to life? That is not to life, because I know he equates the two, but that language, it is like a projector in the sense that it is the light, and that the objective reality is the sort of film screen that language allows us to perceive.
Say that again with respect to the film screen and the light.
Yep.
So that I understand correctly.
So if language is that light and actual objects are the film, then our perception of reality is first with the object or what we sense, but language is primordial to that in his notion of life, affectivity, all that fun jazz.
Yes, but further than that, and in contradistinction to what you said about the light and film, he is arguing that notion that objects are here in the film, in your words, and language is the light that's projecting them forward. Mm-hmm. He's saying that's a Heideggerian notion that if that's true, my left hand right here, that light would be indifferent to the objects. Moreover, not only would that language be indifferent to those objects, that language could never define what the objects were. They were already, wherever they were already there before the light pushed them into us. So his question is, what the hell made them? And the basically the light can't do anything for us other than tell us what we don't know. Like if the light would bring them in front of us and we go, wow, amazing. Where did it come from? What is it? And he's saying if you have a notion of language that does that, instead, what he's saying is he's actually saying that life, the original language of life, is a life that begets itself, that it is a verb in which it's not the saying or the said. He takes that from Levinas. It's not, it is this self-relation. The reason this is such a crazily difficult concept is because when we think of relation, we think of separation. In order for A to touch B, they have to be different things in order for them to relate. And that's hard because when he says self-relation, how do you do that without having two things? And that's why he relies so heavily on pathos or feeling or affectivity, is that when you have two things like this, which are external to one another, they relate outside of one another. And the question is always one of knowledge. How does you see my tattoo right here? So how does Tattoo Hand, let's call him Tatooine for fun. How does Tatooine know non-Tatooine? Like, how do they know each other? And he's saying that's the problem. We shouldn't be asking what knowing is. Knowing is not the answer. Knowing is always external. But over here in this hand, I can feel myself. I can feel the inside of my fingers pressing into my palm. I can feel the resistance inside my muscle as I squeeze. If I relax my hand, I can also feel the reverberations internally. So myself can relate to myself. And he's saying that's what reality does. When reality relates to itself, it can do it radically internally, but it can also do that with language. Language does not have to reveal. Language can be a modality or a movement of that internal relation. Therefore, every relation between two things that language requires always presupposes an internal relation. And that internal relation is everywhere. Therefore, the curtains presuppose it. The blinds presuppose it. My skin presupposes it. Does that make sense? My wife is sitting here like she has to ask me a question. What is it? What's that? She just wanted to hear that part a lot.
I wanted to hear the part you said.
Would you leave me alone and ask me a question? What? She's making fun because she said, with this hand, I can feel myself. Like it sounded dirty or something like that. Okay, so God, get out of here. What do you want? Did you get it?
I gave him anything, but I didn't know if he needed ibuprofen.
I would give him some as late to sleep as we can.
Are you going to be done at 9:30?
Yes.
Do you want me to just wait till you're done?
They'll want me to shut up at 9:30, trust me.
You're done?
Yes. Okay. Sorry. Does that address your question, Noah, or is that off in the wrong direction?
Yes, but my Heideggerian self wants a critique. I know we need to get to Kandinsky, so I'm going to hold my thoughts to annoy you at lunch.
Well, I know we need to get to Kandinsky too, but Brian, help me understand this. This is where I was reading this because I had a hard time with this other function of language that he's talking about. I asked how he got there. I think I get it. But to Noah's point, and it helped me because as he explains this in the last quarter of the essay, it doesn't operate. This language he's talking about now with capital L's and logos with capital L, they don't operate like language. They don't operate like the language that Hegel and Heidegger and all these others talk about. It doesn't even operate like words or speech. And he specifically says this. It's almost metaphorical. So I stopped thinking of it as language completely when he started talking about it that way, because the word is I am, and I am life, and all. And so he starts quoting the scripture, but it's he talking in metaphor. The second function of language is language used in a metaphorical way, not as words and speech and communication and shields against reality and all that. He stopped doing that. So it really threw me that he kept the same language there, the same word, and just shifted a capital letter. And, so I don't know if that's going to help Noah, but I stopped thinking of it as language and said, okay, it's life. It's life. And it's a way of feeling and communicating that is not speech, is not words, is not anything that we understand.
Yes, I think that's a wise move. I think that's a wise move in reading him because that you said this much earlier where you said, I don't know how he ends up here and all the way in this weird religious place. And that's where it is. That's the move you are not feeling like it's that's where the non sequitur is. You feel you're right. The language he's describing is so non-linguistic in the way that we know it that the only way to just it's something that's not even. It's very Augustinian. I don't know if if you all have read Augustine at all, but there's this bit in Confessions where he says something to the effect of like, what could eternal word be? Right. And he says, he's asking these questions about infinity. And he's like, hey, look, if infinity has no beginning and end, like here's infinity. I mean, we can't draw it, right? Because we're infinite. This little, if I drew a circle and I called this thing infinity, then what's this out here? Right? It doesn't make sense. It would be infinite without edge. And Augustine says, okay. Well, then if a word was infinite, then it couldn't start and it couldn't stop. That wouldn't make any sense because wherever the word stopped, it would no longer be infinite. It would be finite. And wherever it started, it would have an edge, and that would make it not infinite. So he's like, what is this word that is infinite? It would have to be being said all the time. Like it would just, and that's so far away from what we know language to be that it stretches the boundaries of our even calling it language, which Augustine doesn't, and which Henri doesn't. He's calling it logos. Now he's going all the way back to these Greek terms and saying that's what we mean by logos. It's not a word. It's not discrete. It's not starting and stopping. He just keeps calling it a verb, which is crazily impossible to know what is it. What is a verb without an object? This goes back to I guess Jackie's point earlier about the numerical nature of language, and Korean is like what it's conceptually difficult for us as English speakers. And I'm not saying everyone's a native English speaker, but at least for me as an English speaker, to speak only with the verb, especially without a performative act. Like we might use a gerund like dancing, and we can cognize that in an event. But even dancing is finite. The music starts, the music stops. The body's here, the body's there. The body's high, the body's low. The tone is here, the tone is there. He is reaching so far behind that, or he thinks he's reaching far behind that you're right, Steve. It does break down. I do think his description on art is more helpful than his description on language, only because we have language in and of itself is already elusive in our ability to pin down what it exactly is. But no, I think your point is well taken, Steve. It's definitely moving beyond what we know as a word to an actual concrete life. And you're right. His last book was called The Word of Life. So if that tells you anything, you're absolutely right, tracking where he's going with this, for sure.
I have a query. Since now with language, happily we've thrown out words, which was kind of getting kind of a sticky point. Let's say a person walks into a room and there's 4 other people in the room and no one says anything, but you walk into the room and everybody definitely has certain feelings and you're getting certain vibes off of other people. I mean, it's just 5 blobs of energy in a box. But you're kind of like, well, I'm the outsider here. I can tell I'm the outsider here for whatever reason. And you're thinking, and I can also kind of tell that blob over there seems to be kind of like the leader. We're waiting for that blob over there to start things. But no one has said anything, and I have absolutely no evidence, but you do kind of feel that way. Even at Book Oblivion, right? You're kind of like, oh, okay, here's these little faces on the screen, and there's a lot going on underneath the language. Is that what he's talking about?
In a very practical sense, sure.
That's the only thing I have.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it may be 1 or 2 steps even more obscure than that, but I think what you're describing is correct. I think what you're describing is like in the event. Yeah, sure. I think there is a feeling in the room. There is a sensation in the room that tells us that what is far more real and far more original than the words that we know as directive. Your start, or I'll stand in for Jessica. Ron, do you want to get started? Before even that, there's that sensation.
Just like, you just walk in the room and you just kind of go, oh, sometimes, and that kind of fit to me with where he says, you don't really have any edges. Because like even us on the screen, we don't really have edges. Someone says something, it affects me. I've crossed the planet from them.
Sure.
And most of the time the words aren't affecting me because I don't understand them. So it must be something else.
No, but that's true. But like that, even if you don't understand them, I think Henri, this is the irony of the whole thing, is that Henri's right. If you don't understand what he's saying, he still ends up being right, because at some level something is happening to you in a very concrete way. Life is happening to you, even in your repulsion. Even if you're like, I don't get this is dumb, this guy's a moron, whatever you think is always happening late to what you're actually, the force that's driving you. And even if there's not an identifiable feature, like, oh, 5 of us are sitting in a room, we're all blobs of energy. I just happen to be kind of a larger blob of energy here below my way, right in this area of a larger blob of energy. But even if that's not happening, in Henri's mind, your very existence, your very self-awareness, your constant externalizing dialogue with yourself. Like when you remember your past, when you think about your future, you're externalizing yourself as an object. You are treating yourself as if it's an it to the I and it, whatever that is. And we do that all the time, except when we're not thinking. For example, God, I gotta go to the bathroom. Even if we don't announce it, we're like, we just feel it. Boom, you're gonna go to the bathroom. There is a self-relation, and it's not just mine. And his point is, it doesn't belong to humans. It belongs to reality. Reality has a self-relation that we've not talked about. And that's why Heidegger got so confused, basically, in his mind. And that self-relation that you already know that you have when you're sitting at home late at night, you're laying in bed, whatever sensations come to mind, but even before you can articulate them with images in your brain, even before you can articulate them with like watching a show that corresponds to whatever you're feeling so that you can identify it, before you sit with the analyst, any of that stuff, that self-relation is so real, it can't not happen. And that's because life simply does its thing. And that's what he's pushing on, is like we have so many philosophical conundrums because we start with the outside. And when things are outside to each other, we always have to figure out how to get over the gap. Here, there. Now, how do I get over it? How do I know whether I'm loving it? How do I know where I'm not imposing myself on it? How do I know this? Well, we try to resolve that with language. We try to say, oh, well, we all exist in language. Yeah, but we find out that language actually distances us from stuff. When we just turn to language, we realize, God, it's behind some veil, and language doesn't do anything for me other than tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about. So somehow that doesn't get me any closer to connecting with the thing. It pushes me further away. And so Henri's response is like, we've got to go back to literally ground zero of reality's self-appearance. And to your point, that's something. If we were to take, basically what I'm saying here is this: if we took your point and pressed it really hard, like you just gave us a button and said, hey, look, when we're in a room with 5 other people, we feel something. Henri's like, hell's yes. Now let's push on that as hard as we can and find out how far that reality will go. We'll find that before I even think of myself, before I talk about myself, before I can put it into words, before I can put it into sounds, before I can identify it cognitively. There is something real happening, and that real thing is happening is life. And the weird thing is, it's only consciousness. When he talks about any of that stuff, it's like a secondary attribute instead of a primary one. It's like everything has life. You don't need to be thinking to have life. That's the key for him. You just have to feel the force of life giving itself to itself. And strangely enough, that just happens to be everything. We can talk about Kandinsky, but unless anybody wants to jump in there.
I want to jump in.
Please do.
So if we could say ground zero is vibration, right? The source of the word vibration. And I'm thinking, now I could be just making shit up.
There's plenty of shit to roll around in.
You know, but if you look at life like a newborn, right? And the newborn doesn't have language, but the newborn is just buzzing with life, that hum of life, right? So the newborn life creates itself into language, with language, for language, like creating life through the word, with the word, in the word. That's where you get the Christian philosophy in there, through him, with him, in him. So if you take it like that, like life itself, creating itself into language with language, that appearing in the appearing, again, I don't know. Like I said, I'm making shit up here. For language. Yeah, that's what I got.
Keep going. No, recycle
That's what
that.
I got.
So what? Wait. Go back. Recycle. So you're saying, if I'm understanding you correctly, that you're trying to extrapolate his ideas as it exists in the life of an infant.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And then the life of an infant is actually, that undercurrent of life itself. That's that total pure vibration. We think infants, what thoughts, what language do they have? But they don't need language. They have pure, it's the essence of life itself in the newborn, right?
Yeah.
And they are creating their lives at like a co-creating their lives with language, with the languaging skills of everyone around them. And in there, and a newborn too, they don't see themselves as separate. Newborns see themselves as a continuation of their mother, right? Or anyone else, until they discover who they, in the mirror, that they're different. But, so they're creating with language, if I could say that. I keep saying that. I don't know, so, and I guess it's really comes down to what your definition of language is.
That's exactly what he's saying.
Yeah.
How do you define it? Yeah.
How do you define language? And he's defining it as logos, and the word, if he's going with his Christian thought, is God. And God, you can go right back to vibration, the primordial hum of life. Language just becomes a vehicle, but it's also more than that. It's that through him, with him, in him. It's everything.
It's interesting. The way you're saying it is really interesting. So to use, this is in the news this week, right? Fusion is in the news all over the place. It's really exciting. And that is I think energy. So Maureen has said this a couple times about energy, blobs of energy. I think she got the blobs of energy by looking at me. So I don't know how I feel about that, but I'm just teasing. I'm teasing. To go by what you're saying about vibration, let's just treat these things in a radically scientific set of terms. And if we took them and said, and this is how I'm going to wrap around to Henri, although he doesn't try to be scientific this way. It's kind of like saying that if we were to treat energy as strings, right? If you're familiar with string theory, you've got this notion that subatomic particles and subquark particles there may be these things that vibrate. In this motion, this string, let's imagine that it's there and we have 10 dimensions and all the math works out. If these strings were to vibrate, somehow in their motion, they form corpuscular or crystalline entities. And they are self-relating. They're self-relating. They don't have otherness. They don't know an outside, but instead they yearn for an outside beyond themselves. Let's imagine they had desire and propensity. And in their desiring for the outside, they encountered a pure nothing. Let's call that dark matter, whatever. And in that relationship of the inside and the outside, we experience what we know as extended experienced life. And that no matter where we went and extended experienced life, whether that meant we were in a rocket to Mars or whether we were by a lake, we would always be in the presence of the most basic, interior, fundamental, invisible attribute of all of that matter, which would be that subatomic vibrating reality. That itself was self-relating. It did not exist beyond the sphere of out there. It did not have to go out into, it wasn't in dark matter apart from what we know. Rather, it was radically present and perpetually concrete, that where there were vibrations, there was life also. And the life that those vibrations begat was a specific concrete life that could be touched, felt, and known. And Henri's selfhood or life is very similar to those strings. Rather than them being multiple, right? Because that's the difficulty here in moving from the metaphor to the philosophy, is that in the metaphor, the strings are identifiable under mathematical principles. We can see where the string is. But if we didn't and thought the world was just one string, whatever that string was like, if you're this Tim Ingold type person and it's just a string, whatever it is, if that were true, that would be closer to Henri's sense of life's own self-relation. But in the same way that the string theory always turns into atoms and motion and bodies, in the same way, life always is supremely singular, but supremely concrete. This is life. This. Not yesterday, not tomorrow. This all right now, no matter where it is life. And that's what he believes. Now, to go to the point about infancy and language, I don't know if you all are familiar with Jacques Lacan. Lacan's idea is that language somehow puts a wall in between the real and the symbolic. Like when babies enter into language, it kind of, for lack of a better term, F's them up. And they get further and further away from reality. Like you said, what they know in their first moments is union, not difference. They think union. And he thinks language separates them. Henri would look at that and say, Lacan, you are spot on. If what language does is operate as a wall between the real and the lived. And he's saying, and Henri is saying, that's the problem, is that belief right there. The second we stick up language as if it's between us and what is real, then language will never let us get over that hump. And what we'll find is our own identity is on the other side of that wall. We can never get to it. But if life is like those strings that are vibrating, we don't have to go anywhere to find it. It is always radically near. And therefore, the goal of understanding is more like confession than it is discovery, is to recognize that it is present. Once we recognize that it is present in Henri's mind, then we are immobilized to act. Then we are free. Then we are empowered, or then we are energized because we are in touch with energy. Which is why in the Kandinsky article, which I supremely failed you to get to by 9:30, in the Kandinsky article, that's why he's saying, that's why Kandinsky's art was abstract. It's because it was not bound up in trying to explain external objects. It was bound up in trying to get close to strings. I'm using it as a metaphor. What the hell do strings look like? I don't know. Have you seen Kandinsky's art? It's a bunch of weird shapes and lines going all over the damn place. And so he's saying, this isn't going away from reality. Kandinsky was digging down into it and realized that no matter what direction those lines went, no matter how dark those reds were, no matter how obscure and green those blues were, he was feeling the weight and the pressure of being alive, and that the artist has the capacity to touch life insofar as that they're able to use those elements to draw close to it, to almost use those elements against themselves, rather than coloring being something that I use to paint the beautiful portrait. The color then allows me to even challenge the idea of the color itself and wonder, what can red look like? Because in the undercurrent where the strings are, where reality is giving itself and where reality is living itself, that's where I can feel red before it becomes red. And so down there, it looks like a bunch of crazy quantum goop. And so there is a remarkable symmetry, I think, between the sciences that we deal with, that we're more familiar with than what Henri would have known. But I'm using that as an extended metaphor, Jackie, to kind of capitalize on what you're saying about infancy, and then bringing it forward further into the question of energy. And if I can make one point for the whole night, it's just that wherever those strings are, those strings don't sit back away from the thing that they create. They're not over here. They don't make your life, and then your life goes on and the strings are like down here waiting to make a new thing. They're not like floating back here in the background like a transcendent God, making the world and then watching it. This, whatever this thing is that creates the world, it is so radically concrete. Whatever it makes, it is that thing. So whatever life makes itself. So it's at once abstract and general, and at the same time concrete, expressive, and discrete at the same time. It's 9:30. You guys get the last word. I failed you miserably. Please don't let me do this a fourth time. Okay.
So, I don't understand why you say you failed. You were spent your time responding to all our responses and our readings and misreadings. That's what.
Well, I appreciate that, Steve. I guess what I want to do more than anything is, like, when I design, I always say one of my general roles in design is I never want the client to need me. I want to draw something or make something that you can draw yourself. So that, not because I want it to be super simple, but because I want to empower the person that I'm working with to kind of take their work and go and take it wherever they want to go with it. And I feel that a lot of times with text like this is like, I want to help people feel at home in the text so that they can move about it with freedom and confidence and not having to rely on explanation. So sometimes that concerns me, that I make myself too large amongst the text, and I'm trying to minimize myself as much as possible. But, Well,
you started out tonight saying kind of like, well, why did people come to Book Oblivion? What were you looking for? And I'm just going to say, like, this is what I was looking for. I'm happy to leave kind of confused and thinking stuff, and then taking out my little Ryan book and writing down questions and going, oh, do you dare ask this question? So, this is what I wanted to read hard things and learn ideas that are, kind of Everest for me. And the first time I see the ideas, then I figure, well, now I know that Everest exists, and I've seen it from the bottom. And, as the time goes by, maybe I'll be able to see it higher up.
Well, and that's a great metaphor, because the farther you go up it, the thinner the air gets and the more delirious everything feels. So that's, it's not unusual. I mean, I think Jessica and I both, one of the things that we really appreciate about our friendship, but everybody, the friendship I have with everybody here is it feels good to exercise these ideas with intelligent people. And so I appreciate the opportunity to explore this stuff, truly. So any other comments, thoughts? Now, just be aware, Henri, towards the end of his life, towards the end of his career, does go a more explicitly religious direction. So the next readings do focus that direction. We had a conversation, some of us together, about religion a year or so ago. We've talked about money. I told Jessica whenever she asked me what I want to explore, I always say I want to explore something that matters. And I mean that in two senses. I mean that literally in terms of matter, qua matter, but I also mean in terms of significance. That's why I'm looking at money. That's why I want to learn about, technical ontologies, digital ontologies. It's why I'm curious about these things. And so it's why I was curious about life. And, so the next one is about religion. We've had some conversations about that before. If you want to circle back to Kandinsky, we can do that. If y'all want to press into the religious question, I'll go ahead and read and prepare for next week, but we'll let you all come to the conversation. I would ask this. Could you all, in an effort to help me, locate some passages, nail them down, and say, hey, this needs to come under discussion, and try to keep them to a tweet length, like think 250 characters. That would just leave us in a safe place so that we don't like have to scroll through 4 pages and get lost in something.
Henri doesn't think in that brief.
I know. We'll let you unfold the thread throughout the course of the hour. I promise. Very true. Very true. Very true. Karen, did you get my emails? Excellent. Josh, good to see you. Have you been thinking about me all day? You can't stop thinking about my face. Do you have a picture of me in your car somewhere? Okay. Well, I can give you one. Just let me know. Okay. Well, if anybody else have any final comments, I'm going to close this out for the night. I've had Taco Bell sitting here and getting corrupt, since I'm going to have a long night. If nobody else, we'll see y'all next. Is it scheduled for next week? It is, right?
Yep, we'll meet next week with you. Saturday is Tribe 4 to 6 Eastern, and then Sunday for Primitive Mythology with Gareth.
Fantastic. Okay, see y'all soon. Thank you again.